I began looking through some of the news stories, and we don't do news here. We're not journalists. We're opinion monsters. I've made that very clear. Journalistic integrity, I don't have any interest in it. I just don't. I'm not a journalist. I'm an opinion monster, and I give my opinion on things that I begin to understand. And I'm beginning to understand that Florence School District 1 has a problem. And the problem is not facilities. They need improvement of facilities, no question about it. But the problem is the incompetency of certain school board members. And I'm certainly not lumping all school board members into this. I think some are genuinely interested in providing a quality education for the young people of this community. I would imagine the folks in Sumter and Orangeburg would have similar stories. But I began reading some of this audit. And you know me.
Well, you're going to read all of it.
I'm going to read all of it and try to understand it. And I saw a lot of words like good practices and internal controls and weak budgetary practices. That's not what I'm seeing. I'm seeing theft.
What?
I'm seeing corruption. I'm absolutely seeing some people taking advantage of their positions of influence. Some people who are public trustees that don't need to be trusted by the public. I know how to read audits. I know the good, the bad, the indifferent. I can see the good and the ugly. I know what some audits portray. I know the way they try to present. And when I read some of the language, I don't think audits are there to call somebody a crook or a thief. I think law enforcement does that after the audit may suggest or not some sort of investigation. But we took exception with what the school board was trying to do with the referendum and the tax increase they proposed to build a lot of new schools and do a lot of wonderful things to improve education in District 1. Some people thought that was kind of a personal vendetta I had with certain. Never has been, never will be. The day I go down that road is the day I don't need to be on the radio. I just thought the ask was too big of the private sector. I thought the business owner was going to take it on the chin in such a monumental way that we'd have a lot of new schools, we'd have an impaired economy. And I analyzed and dissected the best I knew how, and that's where I ended up, and we opposed it pretty vehemently. But it was not personal with me. This is not personal with me. But as much as I opposed the referendum a couple of 3 years ago, I believe that there's something going on in District 1 that is criminal. And I'll make that accusation because I understand what I read, and I can put two and two together. And I can, he said, she said, and they said, and they did not say. My first question is, why does a school board member have a credit card? You're asking for trouble. School board members don't need credit cards. If you've got a personal credit card, you go to a seminar or retreat, charge it to yourself, get the district to reimburse you. That's a bona fide paper trail. School board members don't need credit cards, period. That's what makes me suspicious. And it's not just that school board members have credit cards, but is there a culture? Because if school board members have credit cards, then that leads me to believe there's not a real close checking behind of what school board members are doing or not. I'll applaud the current superintendent, and I mean this sincerely. We disagreed on the referendum. I am 1,000,000% supportive of what he's trying to do. It began when there was a food contract. Remember, there was some money missing or money lost. I looked at some of the numbers. In 16, the food service part of our schools lost $1.2 million. And then it became $2.2 million and 750,000. Those are monument. How in the hell do you lose $1.5 million in a school's providing service in a school district with 16 or 17,000 kids? You know what I think? Somebody's stealing. That's the only place I can go. And look, I'm not a journalist, so don't call me and say, you're slandering people. I'm giving you my opinion, which I've always done. And when I read these audits and I see some of the numbers and some of the perspectives, and I look at construction jobs and the bids that were given, it looks to me like there's some funny business going on. When I see the food contracts, and I applaud Rich O'Malley, I'll call him by name. I applaud him to the nth degree in the way he has stood against certain school board members who I believe have agendas that are not in the students' best interest and border on corruption. And we got to dig into that. We must dig into that. We have an obligation and responsibility. We're in a news desert. I mean, we've got a local paper. Nobody reads it. We are a resource that must be called upon to hold public officials accountable. And when I read an audit, and I've been in business my entire life, and I can count, and I can read between the lines sometimes, and audits aren't there to call people criminals. They're not there to display corruption. They're there to say things like not good practices, lacked internal controls, weak budgetary practices. That's dog whistle to me. Something's up. And then when you look at the budgeting process for some of the construction jobs, and this is preceding O'Malley getting here. Once again, we disagreed on the referendum, but my opposition to the referendum was not the superintendent. My opposition was the incompetent school board that were asking for the referendum without addressing the public in the way I felt the public should be addressed. I never thought that we would deal with corruption, but I think that's what we're dealing with. I really believe, and I'm not accusing anybody of anything, and I want to be real careful. I'm not saying every school board member. I've never said that. But there's certain school board members and certain arrangements within our school district that I think are corrupt. And I think people have financially advantaged themselves at the expense of taxpayers, and I think it needs to be exposed. I don't know how we get there, but I want to be a voice of beginning the conversation, because I don't know that anybody else will. And I understand that the people in Sumter don't have a lot of interest in this. I understand the people in Orangeburg don't have a lot of interest. I'm sure they've got their own problems. And if you'll let us know kind of what's going on over there, I think we have a responsibility to engage in these sorts of debates. So I'm making a pledge that we're going to periodically revisit this issue, because it must be revisited. I have no idea who's looking at it. I have no idea where, when you get an audit that says things like, you know, it lacks budgetary, or it has weak budgetary practices, it lacks internal control, not the best of practices. I don't know what you do with that audit. I'm not on the school board. I'm not an administrator within the school district. But something must be done. You've got to give somebody else a chance to look at this and let them evaluate whether or not people are deceitful, dishonest, misappropriating tax dollars. Because our public schools are funded by you and I and all the taxpayers around these varying counties of which we broadcast in. And when you accept the responsibility to be a public trustee, the last thing you need to do is financially advantage yourself. That is unforgivable. You can't do that. You can do stupid things as a politician. I mean, I'm a poster child for that. And you can apologize and you can seek forgiveness and you'll be forgiven most times. But when you take that public trustee and you financially advantage yourself, that's corruption. And corruption must be rooted out. And I think there's something going on. And Rev, you say it. You kind of. I mean, you do this all the time with me. Rev will nod his head and say, "Well, here he goes. Yeah, here I go." I mean, that's well said. Here I go. I'm going to make it my business to figure out exactly what's going on with it. And it's not every member of the school board. I want to be careful. I mean, I think people understand that. You can't, paint with that broad a brush and say, well, every school board member is doing this or every school board member is doing that. We know some of the issues they've had. And I'm not here to personally embarrass anybody. I'm not here to slander anybody. But I can do the math. And the numbers don't add up. And when you look at some of the construction jobs and you look at the food service budget, you can't miss that much money. You can't be that wrong on estimations. The budget can't be that out of whack. Something's up. Something's up. And we're going to make it our business at Wake Up Carolina to investigate the best we can to find out exactly where the truth lies. Because in essence, you as the public, and I think I said a couple of weeks ago, we had this, I mean, we're always dealing with racism in public education, and I get that. I mean, I guess the country will deal with racism until the day we die, and I appreciate that. But as a school board member, your job is to not promote nor aspire for racial diversity. That's not your job. Your job is to make decisions that make our school districts better for every kid. Black, white, red, yellow, Republican, Democrat, whatever that may be. And the decisions you make affect the quality of education our young people receive and the quality of economic development our community involves itself in. And if corruption is prevalent or pervasive in our school board, in our school system, in our school district, it needs to be exposed. And when I read these audits, it leads me to believe that somebody's up to something. And we're going to find out who's up to what. Let's take a break. We'll be back in a minute.